Hello everyone, Sergeant Break here, and today I am in a different place. So, instead of seeing my American flag in the background, you get to see my German football flag, or soccer ball flag, whatever you want to call it. But we are reacting to a video, because one of my, people requested it in the comments section. Let's look, okay, let's see. Their name is 201st. So, yeah, thank you for the suggestion. Hopefully there's not too many parts, but we'll see.
Ah, quelle bonne journée pour être français. Quelle ce sont.
This video is sponsored
Okay.
by Skillshare. It provides over 28,000 courses on a wide variety of topics. Stay tuned at the end of the video to hear more. Of all the mechanized combatants in World War II, the German Panzer Army is probably one of the most talked about and easily has had the most written on it out of all the tank forces of all the other combatants. There's something about
Well, the Germans did have some pretty cool tanks.
German tanks that really captures the imagination of everybody who was into World War II, even from a young age. When I was a kid, back when the History Channel was basically the World War II channel, I remember always looking forward to the documentaries that would focus on German tanks. With all the discussion online, I've noticed that that seems to be pretty typical. The whole metric ton of books and media on it really seems to back this up, to the point that the discussion on them has pretty much been done to death. I mean, even I have contributed a few nails to that coffin.
Well, yeah, it is kind of interesting because it's not like you could argue that other countries did have better tanks. The Americans had some pretty amazing tanks, and the Russians for a while, with their T-34s, they could easily beat the Germans for like 1941, 1942 with those tanks until they came out with like the Panthers and the Tigers and all that. And Germany was actually kind of behind because the other countries, they sort of learned to make their armor sloped, and that provided a lot of defense against other tanks, and that was something Germany was behind on.
I mention all of this because it would be
But at the same time, those German tanks, were completely necessary to Germany's blitzkrieg. Like, that's one of the reasons why they did so well, especially in Operation Barbarossa.
Impossible to cover absolutely everything that could be said about German tanks in this video, while keeping it in the same tone of my other ones on different countries. So this video will be kind of brief, but if you want to read more for yourself...
By the way, I'm just saying that because they're fast. The tanks were fast, not, like, faster than infantry. That's why I'm saying they're necessary to the blitzkrieg.
In the description, I've listed some of my favorite books and lectures on the subject. Alright, disclaimer over, let's get into it.
Yes, get over there!
Like, well, most other countries, Germany's...
Oh my gosh! That map!
Over, let's get into it.
Yes, get over there!
Like, well...
Oh, okay, never mind. Oh, it's not as bad as I thought. Okay, I saw something that... Okay, well, first of all... Okay, the first thing is, it's not really a mistake, but there's a lot of things where I see Romania with a U. I have a book that has Romania with a U, and I never really understood that, and I see it a lot. So could y'all please explain that? And also, this was not Turkey, it was the Ottoman Empire at the time, of course, as y'all probably know. And some of these borders are a bit, like, kind of weird, but they're sort of small, so it's fine.
Well, most other countries, Germany's experience with tanks began in World War I after they were sprung on them by the British. And their initial interest in the concept was rather small.
The British tanks were pretty
After getting
cool.
over the initial shock and hurriedly placing orders for their own designs, the Germans very quickly figured out that the things were not all that scary once you figured out how to kill them, causing the German tank program to take a back seat to more pressing projects. And with resources being tight, only a handful of German models were produced in the...
Yeah, the German models, they were awful. They were just boxes with a bunch of sticks shooting out of them. This is a perfect example. It's just, why? Why would you do that?
In two super heavy K-wagons that began construction but were not completed before the war's end. Once the war was finished and the German army was reduced to only 100,000 men under the Versailles Treaty, German generals got together and began discussing what happened, why they lost, and what needed to be changed. After an early assessment that was quickly deemed inaccurate of a French-style defensive doctrine for the future, the German army decided that in the closing years of World War I, they had actually pretty much gotten the correct concept for modern warfare down in their stormtrooper tactics.
Good job.
This involved concentrating forces in an attack on a small area of the enemy line to break through and wreak havoc behind said lines, essentially making trench warfare obsolete. And this is where one of the most important figures...
Yeah, just, if Germany would have learned that, like, at the very beginning, well, did they? I don't think they had that at the very beginning. Actually, I don't know. I'm just not going to say anything because I don't want to be wrong.
German mechanization. Colonel General Hans von Seeckt enters the picture. Von Seeckt put a huge emphasis on maneuver warfare, something that Germany would use to great success in the Second World War, and really got the ball rolling on the concept in its future influence on the German army. Although they now had the doctrine, they still lacked the integral parts to this, the mechanization that would make it all possible. And the key to this was tanks, but there was still a big problem. Under the rules of the Versailles Treaty, Germany was not allowed to possess tanks along with many other tools that would be needed in modern warfare.
Yeah, I think they lied about the tanks.
Von Seeckt began implementing workaround programs that would allow the German army to become familiar and experiment with these weapons and their new concepts around the treaty's limitations. This included a program working with the Soviets to develop and test tank designs in Russia, away from the watchful eye of the Allies. Most of the tanks produced during the collaboration with the Soviets, including the light tractor, were dead ends, excluding a few such as the Klein tractor, which eventually developed into the Panzer I. That brings us to the first generation of German tanks. The Panzer I was developed as a training tank, armed only with machine guns. But due to the relatively short period of time between when Hitler took...
So does Switzerland have those tanks or something?
Power in 1933,
because of that cross?
Beginning rearmament, to the beginning of the war in 1939, Panzer
Why do
I
they have
made up around
crosses?
half of the German tank forces at the very start.
Does Switzerland have Panzer ones? I'm so confused.
War, along with the Panzer II, that although still a light tank, was upgunned with a 20mm autocannon that made up another good chunk of the German Panzer Force. And although our memory of German tanks is made up mostly of large, heavily armored vehicles with big guns, these Gen 1 tanks were what made up the backbone of the Panzer Force for most of the early years of success, in a time when most armies that they came up against were fielding heavier, harder-hitting tanks. And on paper, this looks like it should not have worked, but the way that Germany implemented these lighter tanks was what made all the difference. Heinz Guderian, a lower-ranking officer at the time of the development of the Panzer Arm, who had begun his army career in communications, provided Germany with a huge technical leg up against their enemies by insisting that every German tank have a radio. So while the French, Polish, and British were still relying on either one-way radios, signal flags, or other antiquated forms of communication, with two-way radios sprinkled around, mostly to command tanks, every German tank commander had a radio to communicate with his superiors and fellow tank commanders.
That must have been very helpful.
Much better coordination, combined with this maneuver warfare doctrine, would quickly overwhelm enemy formations. This seriously negated the more inferior aspects of these Gen 1 tanks. The Gen 1s in the early campaigns were paired with the ever-growing numbers of second-generation German tanks, the Panzer III and the Panzer IV. Developed side by side in the mid to late 30s, these tanks are really what German commanders had in mind as they experimented with their earlier designs. With the Panzer III being the anti-tank weapon, first armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun in the Alf's A through G variants, and two very armed with a 37 earlier design. The Panzer...
Yeah. Remember what I said about sloped armor? This is not a good tank for to receive fire from enemies.
Panzer III being the anti-tank weapon, first armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun in the Alf's A through G variants, and two variations of the 50 millimeter gun, which had always been the goal for the tank to be armed with from the outset, and the Alf's F through M. This tank took advantage of an extremely ergonomic 5-man crew, with excellent optics for the gunner and vision blocks for the commander. Although appearing in smaller numbers in the campaigns of 1939 through 40, the Panzer III became the workhorse of the German army in Operation Barbarossa and into Fall Blau, with the very latest version, N, mounting a 75mm gun of the early Panzer IVs once it had been outdated by 1940. The Panzer IV, armed with a short-barrel 75mm gun in its early variants, began its life as an infantry support weapon that was later upgunned multiple times with various long-barrel 75mm.
Those look so cool.
Guns, ending the war as the mainstay tank for the German army and being one of only a handful to be in service from the very beginning to the very end of the war. However, for all the successes these tanks had throughout the war, the number of variants I had to list in their descriptions begins to show one of the downsides of the German approach to tank production as a whole. The Germans love to tinker with their designs and fit in change upon change to a vehicle during its production lifespan. And although this seems fairly benign on the surface, as of course you would want to improve your vehicle as you come up with better ideas, this can create a huge bottleneck in the production capability of your factories. The Germans are notorious for this multi-model short-run type of production, with every major vehicle that it created being subjected to a long list of changes throughout its lifespan. And this happened with almost every type of vehicle. I'm only covering the main tanks in this video, but assault guns, self-propelled artillery, and tanks alike would have many, many different variants that were created, with many of the changes being not very impactful to the overall combat performance of the vehicle. Now, I know what comes next is probably what you've been waiting for this whole video, but due to the large amount of information this topic commands, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and get to the Gen 3s in part 2. Because the late war heavies are such a big part of what represents World War II to so many people, I think they deserve their very own video.
I wish I would have talked about how they were used in certain situations, like North Africa and Fall Rot and Operation Barbarossa. Should have talked about that a little bit more, but maybe I'll talk about that in the next videos. Who knows? But yeah, I don't really know much about tanks and all of that, like the specifications. I've just, it's just more of like a, I don't know how to describe it, but I don't know much about tanks in World War II. They're not really interesting to me. That's probably the main reason why, but I mean, this video is making it kind of interesting, the way they're talking about it. How many parts are there? Oh, these are clips. I guess there's only 2 parts. Yeah, the Italian tank meme video should be fun if y'all want to watch that. But anyway, so I'm getting distracted. I finished watching the video. And again, I'm trying to keep these short because I make my videos way too long, I think. And that's why I'm trying not to react as much as I usually do. Okay, anyways, I'm doing it again. I'm sorry. But yeah, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, if you want to. And comment below, suggest what you want me to watch in the next one. I read like pretty much every single comment. So, yeah. Goodbye.